Once again, if you use ChatGPT, I don't respect you as a human being. Anyway. Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host of the Toast, Rightos, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's like we always do. Now, I have a questions abound episode today because I could not think of a topic. Well, that's not exactly true. I have a topic. I don't know how long it'll be because it's like the most he needs a new entry for something because he's losing his mind thing that I think I've brought up in a while. But I'm gonna put up two pictures on the podcast. So it's just something I don't really do. I don't pull up a lot of graphics on the podcast because it's not really the forum for it. But I feel like I need to properly show why I'm going crazy. So this is the princess from Princess Quest, right? We know her, we love her. And this is Chica from Secret of the Mimic, the original Chica design. We know her, we love her. If you zoom into their heads, okay, just stick with me here. If you zoom into their heads, this is a very similar head shape. It is a rounded top, flared bottom, something jutting out on the top. I know. It's crazy. It's hey, I'm counting toes again. Like, it's one of these. But like, I wouldn't bring this up if there wasn't already connections between these characters. Because this is a flimsy connection. I readily admit this is a very flimsy connection. But Fiona is the one who designed this Chica outfit. Fiona Murray, right? Stick with me. And there's a lot of connections between Fiona Murray and Princess Quest, to the point where, like, I made a theory about how she might be editing Princess Quest to get back at Glitch Trap. I mean, Princess Quest 3 literally has a start where the Fiona console is. Because if this is this weird recreation of the Help Wanted lobby, the Help Wanted lobby is pretty one-to-one with the pizzeria, with the simulated pizzeria at the basement of Secret of the Mimic, and in that spot, in the simulated pizzeria, is where we find the Fiona machine, which is where we start in Princess Quest 3. So, like, there are connections between Fiona and Princess Quest already. So a connection between Chica and the princess is crazy. Could the princess be Fiona? Is where this is going. Like, okay, so again, super out there theory, super like insane to say, look, Chica's head kind of looks like the princess's head. Is Fiona the princess? I was very hesitant because at the end of the day, I think whoever is playing it is the princess. I think Gregory's the princess when we play it in Security Breach. I think the protagonist of Help Wanted 2, whether that be Cassie's dad or Edwin, you never know. I think he is the princess if you're playing it in Help Wanted 2, so on and so forth, right? But it's interesting. Actually, I might even take that back because Princess Quest 4 feels fairly separate from 1, 2, and 3. And I think that's intentional. Similar to how Princess Quest 1 from Help Wanted 1 mobile port, even though it's the same Princess Quest 1, feels separate than the Princess Quests in Security Breach. And again, I think that's intentional because they all are kind of doing different things. In Help Wanted 1 mobile port, I feel like Princess Quest 1 is kind of reinforcing the idea that Vanessa's mind has been taken over by Glitch Trap. And I think that makes the most sense. And then we see this again in Security Breach, but you play Princess Quest 1, but that also allows you to then play Princess Quest 2 and eventually Princess Quest 3. And of course, beating Princess Quest 3 is what breaks Vanessa out of the hold of Glitch Trap. But we know these games are being edited. It's most clear in the third one, but even the second one, right? If Princess... I'm of the opinion Princess Quest 1 is the only real in-universe game here. And that's been edited by Glitch Trap. And Princess Quest 2 and 3 are continual edits of Princess Quest by Fiona to undo what Glitch Trap has done to the people he's done it to. But if we take it a step further, the idea of the princess being Fiona is not that far off. Right? If we take it that one extra extreme further,
we start kind of cooking. Because again, if Fiona is already making edits to the Princess Quest console, who's to say she is not inserting herself into the narrative? I mean, literally someone who has been taken out of the narrative over and over again. Go and watch the Feminist Podcast episode if you missed it. Inserting herself into the narrative. I bring it up in that, we brought it up in the conversation in that podcast, that how fitting is it that in this series where we have women who are having their autonomy and voice taken away, the way to begin to fight back against Glitchtrap is literally taking a princess, a defenseless, weaponless princess, and continuing her story and giving her the autonomy to protect herself with the Sword of Light. Literally taking a female character who is trapped and defenseless and giving her means and autonomy to defend herself. How, like, that has to be on purpose. It's so direct. So one step further, what if that princess is Fiona? Right? And what if Chica is this linking thread? The reason why the princess is yellow and has that shaped head is because of that Fiona connection. Not even to say that like the princess is based off of Chica. That might just be a Fiona design quirk, right? Because I think it's notable that in Princess Quest 3, the two characters we interact with are Chica and Foxy, the two characters who are guaranteed to be Fiona Murray originals. So again, it's all layered upon layered upon layered. The idea that Princess Quest is not necessarily being beaten actively in the story, but could literally just be a visual metaphor. Kind of like what I talked about with Happiest Day and FNAF World. But to expound upon that, the idea of like, what is Princess Quest showing us but somebody going into a digital space and finding the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of Glitchtrap and using it to destroy him? Is that not exactly what the fuck Fiona Murray wants to do? Or at least what F10N4 at this point wants to do? Even with the Mex's console, we see that she's fairly successful with this, with the Mex's console, keeping the Mimic trapped in that basement and keeping Glitchtrap away from it. It takes a third party in Cassie, a variable that F10N4 could not have predicted, this new variable, and a very cunning one at that, to be able to undo all of the safe marks that F10N4 was able to provide. And this is kind of what we're seeing in Princess Quest. Again, like, Princess Quest is showing us a character in a digital space finding the vulnerabilities for Glitchtrap, which is exactly what F10N4 would want to do. So, is this connection a hint? Is the fact that the princess and Chica kind of look the same a hint? Maybe. Possibly. You know, this is something that, like, I keep kicking around about making it a full video, and I probably will, but it's one of those things that feels like classic FNAF to me, where, like, you know, we were looking at Follow Me, and we were like, well, wait a minute. In Follow Me, this Freddy has buttons, but FNAF 1 Freddy doesn't have buttons. What's that about? Right? Like, it feels like one of those again. Where I'm like, no, wait a minute. These two head shapes are eerily similar for games that technically came out back to back. Or at least, you know, Help Wanted 2 is in the middle there. But you know what I mean? Like, the Security Breach, Secret of the Mimic connections are interesting to say the least. And there's a lot of connections, even with the building layout of Secret of the Mimic and Security Breach. Am I saying the building was reused? No. What I am saying is it's probably likely that the Mimic technology was used in the planning and schematics of the Pizzaplex, which is why there are so many rooms that feel eerily similar to Secret of the Mimic rooms. Not because it's literally being reused, but because if you ask a Mimic what to build, it'll say, you should build the thing I know about again. Kind of like how all generative AI is not actually artificial intelligence, but instead just a water destroyer that will just steal information and regurgitate it at you. Once again, if you use ChatGPT, I don't respect you as a human being. Anyway. All this to say, have I lost my mind? Probably. But this is an interesting connection, and I stand by that. Anyway, that was only like 12 minutes. That's a topic for you. Let's do questions. If you have questions you want answered on the podcast, feel free to ask them at Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That email is in the description to copy and paste because it's a pain to type out. Our first question comes from Tyler, they, them. At first, it sounds like a gameplay mechanic, but in FNAF 1, Phone Guy specifically points out that the animatronics have become more aggressive the longer the week goes on, which means something has to happen between Sunday night and Monday morning, or whatever days there are, right? Does this imply something with Remnant, or the Souls, or something else? Is Fazbear resetting them every week, like with controlled shocks? The only animatronics this makes sense for are the Springtrap / Scrap Trap, Scrap Baby, Molten Freddy, and Lefty, because in FNAF 3 and Pizza Stand, Pizza Sim, they get more aggressive because they're trying harder and harder to kill you, which I would chalk up to the rest of the animatronics, except for the fact that in all other locations, there's a different night guard before you. In FNAF 2, I would toss it up to them recently getting possessed and getting kind of used to it, except for the puppet, who seems the most stable and solely reliant on the music box. FNAF 4 is Nightmare, so nothing really to figure out there, unless Williams specifically made the Nightmare experiments more aggressive the longer they went on to mirror the FNAF 1 location, training Michael. Want to know your thoughts because I haven't heard anyone mention this, and if it wasn't for Phone Guy specifically stating it, I would think it's just a gameplay mechanic. So I copy and pasted this a little poorly, but essentially the meat of this question is, in FNAF 1, the animatronics get more aggressive as the game goes on. Obviously, that's how video games work. But in the week before, Ralph states specifically that the animatronics are trying harder and harder to kill him as the week goes on. So what's that about? And, this question goes through that in FNAF 6, that makes sense. In FNAF 3, that makes sense. FNAF 4 is a nightmare, chalk it up to whatever. Sister location isn't linear, chalk it up to whatever. And in FNAF 2, they did seemingly recently get possessed, so, there's an excuse there for it. But in FNAF 1, they've been possessed for a while now, and they are getting harder throughout the week. And we're a new security guard. We just got there. Frankly, I think it's twofold. I think, yes, it probably... Actually, I guess threefold. First of all, it probably is a video game mechanic. I think at the end of the day, the main reason for it is because that's how video games work. But I think there's two possible explanations for this whole situation. One, it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Knowing that that's how the games work, in the book, they specifically mention that they're getting more aggressive as the nights go on to better mirror the games. That's possible. The third option is where we get into lore speculation. And for this third option, if it is lore relevant, I see two pathways for it. Either we are playing through the week before in FNAF 1, or, similar to 3 and 6, they are actively trying to kill a security guard to do what they need. So in the week before, it's revealed that the FNAF animatronics, more than anything, want to get a massive charge and leave. They want to charge up as much as they can, overload their batteries so they last for a while, and just leave, and just go do whatever they want. They don't want to be here anymore. So as the week goes on, they're getting more and more aggressive with Ralph until eventually Ralph either dies or there's the good ending where he overloads them on the chargers, it resets them, and he can leave. I see two explanations here for why the animatronics get more aggressive throughout the week. Option one, they don't want a night guard interfering with their plans, so they are trying to kill the night guard. And as the days go on, they have to try harder and harder, because maybe previous night guards were not as good at this as Michael Afton is. That's option one. They literally are just trying harder to kill you. Option two is the resetting idea. So this gets brought up a little bit. The most recent time it got brought up that I can remember is in the schedule theory, where they bring up the fact that the electric shock we administer in sister location might literally be resetting them in a sense of calming them down from the remnant that's pumping in them and making them easier to control and more manageable. So if that's true, in the week before, their massive plan is to overload with charge and then use all of that charge and get out of there. And you stop them by massively overloading them and short-circuiting them, which resets them. is that not just a controlled shock? Is that not literally administering a controlled shock to reset them? And if in Sister Location we learn that administering a controlled shock to an animatronic that's possessed by Remnant can subdue the effects of Remnant for some time, they might literally be getting reset before night one. If we are overloading them on the shock panel, they are all receiving a controlled shock, they all have their Remnant subdued, and they all return back to quote-unquote easy mode, night one mode, right? Like, we literally might be administering a controlled shock, or at least Ralph does right before it. Now, obviously, in canon, he doesn't do this. In canon, he dies because, the ending where one of the endings where he dies is the one he leaves all the phone logs in. But who's to say their plan worked? Like, if the week before could be fully canon, as far as I'm aware. Because, like, all that needs to be explained, like, the only handwave that fixes all of this is in the ending where Ralph dies, but he leaves the phone logs. The animatronics try to go through with their plan to get a massive charge and skedaddle. And in doing that, they accidentally charge themselves. They accidentally controlled shock themselves and reset themselves. The plan didn't work. Like, it's totally possible. So all in all, I think probably the most likely answer here, this is one of those questions that's more fun to talk about rather than like actually solve anything. Because like, if you go to my head, say, what do I think is most likely? I'm going to say it's a gameplay mechanic, and Scott did not think about that. But it's fun to explore the idea that there are options for this to be explained within the lore. Either they're literally getting frustrated and trying harder to kill Michael Afton, or the plan didn't work and they controlled shocked themselves, and as Sister Location might be implying, that is enough to subdue the Remnant so the animatronic itself can retake over, and they have to kind of slowly break their way out of that again. So there kind of are actually lore explanations for this, essentially what is most likely to be a gameplay mechanic, which is a fun concept. So thank you for your question, Tyler. It was fun to kind of debate those possibilities. Our next question comes from Juniper, they. What are your thoughts on Deltarune? Now, I could have saved this for next week, but I kept kicking around this question because I still technically have not finished Deltarune as of recording this. I have played all the way through Chapter 3, and I'm about halfway through Chapter 4. I'm at the study. I just got to the study, and I'm trying to... I didn't talk to anything in there, so I'm sure I'm going to learn more as I play. I've not played Weird Route either. But as somebody who has played all 3 chapters, and is halfway through Chapter 4, and has not played Weird Route, but has seen, some spoilers online, has seen, like, I know who the secret boss of Chapter 4 is going to be, I think I've got some thoughts. So, let's get into them. First of all, I think device theory is the most likely theory that I've heard so far. Also, hey, massive Deltarune spoilers. Massive Deltarune spoilers. Skip to here if you don't want to hear them. Or skip to that. Why would I do that to myself and make it harder? Skip to the chapter. Just skip this chapter if you don't want to hear the spoilers. The big question, right? The plan to bring on the roaring. What is going on with that? And why is Rouse hiding so much of it from us? And why is Rouse time and time again censoring this story? This is probably something I'll learn by the end of Chapter 4, but I think this is a fun time capsule. So it's interesting that in the music section of Chapter 3, there are lyrics that Rouse sings that are, cutesy and fun, but the chorus is, more is like suddenly about taking up your soul to like guide us through the night or whatever. And that if you play it, like there are other lyrics that are more correct that are not like Rouse's version of it. And in those, it's much more, we'll say roaring adjacent, for lack of a better word. It's a lot more ambivalent. So you have to ask the question, right? Is this Rouse being like, this is a little intense and I'm a cute fluffy boy, I want things to be nice and happy? Or is there something he is scared of? Is there something he doesn't want us to know? And then the roaring itself, this prophecy of like, if enough dark fountains open, the world is covered in darkness. We know for a fact that Chris is opening them without the soul. And then the soul is using Chris to close them. And we know, well, where I'm at in chapter 4, it could go either way. It seems like, because I've only seen before the Dark World in chapter 4, that Light World section. And the first half of chapter 4 is really setting up Noelle's mother, I forget her name, to be one of the Roaring Knights. And I say one of because there's a picture with a silhouette that looks a lot like Asgore and Undertale and 2 knights. Which I think makes sense because I do think, it just makes sense that there'd be 2 of them, frankly. So we have the scenes in the first half of chapter 4 where there is Chris on the phone, and then Chris calls to say that Susie has the guitar, and then suddenly Noelle's mom, who was not supposed to be home, is home, takes the guitar, berates Noelle, and apologizes to Chris, saying that Chris is welcome anytime. This could be a red herring. This could be a red herring. Because while this is all, it's one of those things where it's almost so obvious it feels like a red herring. That in chapter 4, we're learning who all of these characters are and their motivations in some way. Not to mention the whole thing about, she likes katanas. She has something that resembles the black shard that Asgore is looking at in her house. She likes red heart-shaped objects. A quote from Noelle. It's so on the nose that it almost feels like a red herring. But that also could be the red herring in and of itself. The idea of, it is so obvious that it makes you think it's too obvious when it is just that obvious. I saw one spoiler that doesn't make any sense in my brain, and I won't say it out loud. I saw it on Twitter in a meme, and I cannot place it. I don't know if it's end of chapter 4 or if it's a weird route, but where we're standing, I don't understand why the hell it would happen. All I'll say for those who probably know what spoiler I saw, somebody's dad gets hit with something, and that's all I saw, and it doesn't make any sense yet. But then there's so many intricacies that are really interesting to me. One of the biggest being Asgore. What have you done? Right, Asgore did something. Because not only are they divorced, which, in Undertale happened for various reasons of Asgore's fault, they're divorced again in Deltarune. But there keeps being these hushed references to something. The whole oh yeah, we used to love that guy. Now all he does is do flowers. It's that's a weird thing to say. They phrase it in a way that seems like there was something that caused this. And of course, the biggest thing being when Asgore is looking at the Black Shard, being I forget exactly what he says, but it's something along the lines of this time she'll have to believe me. He is trying to be exonerated for something. He believes something and did something so horrid that it ended their marriage. And he did it because he believes something. It's really interesting. What have you done, Asgore? Right? It's one of those things. And again, maybe end of chapter 4 or Weird Vouch says this. I don't know. I wouldn't doubt if it doesn't. And maybe chapter 5 or 6, we're going to get the Asgore chapter. And that's when we learn. But Asgore has done something. Other thoughts? I will say overall thoughts on Deltarune. Amazing game. So charming. Love all the characters. I am so endlessly charmed by the characters of Deltarune. Like, the beginning half of Chapter 4 was a treat. It was a delicious treat that had me giggling and kicking my feet the whole time. Like, you're telling me I get to, as the soul, fuck with Chris in a closet while I get to watch two lesbians be bad at flirting? It was so fun. It was such a fun, cute scene to just be in, where I just be like, oh, you gotta be quicker than that. You gotta be quicker than that. And outside Susie's like, I don't have a tail, you know? It's just such a fun, God, I love these characters. They're so fun and charming. The fact that, like, when you enter the dark world in the first half of Chapter 4, silently, no words being spoken, Lancer's just on a wall, and if you get close enough, he just hops down to piggyback on Susie, and it's just expected. Like, these characters are so charming. I do sense angst on the horizon. I do feel angst on the horizon with how many times Susie has reiterated that she hates when somebody does not tell her the whole deal and is not honest with her. And while I do feel that Chris themselves does like Susie and would be Susie's friend in a heartbeat, the soul interference, when that is found out, will cause a rift. I think that is almost a guarantee. I think that's not a surprise. I like, that's not a hot take. I'm sure there's probably angst comics out there right now about exactly that. I'm not ready for that. That's going to hurt me very deeply. I just want them all to be happy and friends and yippee. But I could talk about these characters and the little things for hours. What is Deltarune is the question, right? And I mentioned this at the top. I think device theory makes the most sense to me, in the sense that I think Chris, and whether it's Des or Noelle's mom, whoever the other knight is, those two know that Deltarune is some sort of Gaster simulation. They don't know why. They don't know what this simulation is for. Maybe this is just core experiments. I don't know what this simulation is or what its goal is. But clearly it's Gaster who's doing it, I think is very clear. And I think Chris and either Des or Noelle's mom, when I figure out which I think makes more sense, the game seems to really be setting it up as Noelle's mom. But I see so much goddamn fan art of Des as the Roaring Knight that, like, maybe that's something that I'll find out in the latter half of Chapter 4. I don't know. Regardless, I mean, to be fair, as far as I know right now, it could be both. I mentioned there's two Roaring Knights, and they both look identical. And both Des and Noelle's mom have antlers, which match with the Roaring Knight, so on and so forth. Now I mentioned the whole baseball bat theme with the... Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. I think Chris and the other Roaring Knight are trying to enact the roaring to break the simulation. It's that theory, and this is pretty much device theory, right? But it's that thinking of, like, if we are in a simulation and nothing matters, how can we break it? And will that get us out? Like, it's the classic trope. You see this in DDLC. You see this in, like, every Matrix style story of, like, if I am within this fake world, can I manipulate it to get out of it? And if there's literally a prophecy about the end of the world, bringing that on could end the simulation. And if we end the simulation, do we get to leave? So, like, I think that makes the most sense, is that the roaring is there are two people purposely trying to bring the roaring on to end it. Now, where does this clash come in? Well, there's the soul, right? And again, this is pretty standard device theory. As far as I'm aware, correct me in the comments. I'm still very new to the theory crafting of Deltarune. I could be fucking up a lot of stuff. Feel free to correct me. I'm here to learn. Because I won't see this until I'm done chapter 4. I go live tomorrow to hopefully finish chapter 4. And at that point, spoilers abound. I'm going to play Weird Route eventually, but we'll get there. So if I get any of this wrong, feel free to correct me. But the idea of, you make your goner and then a new voice comes in and says your choices doesn't matter. Your name is Chris. And the soul is put inside of Chris. Right? Where somebody is essentially stepping in to be like, hey, we need that soul instead, actually. And we need to contain it. And Chris is the receptacle to contain it. I think Gaster's original simulation is, whatever it is, it involves the soul just kind of doing its thing, for lack of a better term. It involves, from what I think, Gaster's original simulation might not even have the soul. It's more about learning about dark fountains. Similar to, the wall at the end of Undertale. But once multiple dark fountains start spawning, Gaster needs to stop that to protect the simulation. So he inputs the soul, whether that's a simulated one or what have you, he inputs it into the system, but it is then captured by the two Roaring Knights. And at that point, at this point, either Gaster isn't as in control of the simulation as he wants to be, which I think is very, very possible, going into, the Eggman and all of that nonsense. Or Gaster, a sucker for a cool thing that might happen, thinks it's so interesting to watch. After all, the whole we see this when fighting the Roaring Knight in chapter 3, where you try to fight anyway, and Gaster's like, "Oh, you're gonna try to beat this motherfucker? Sure. Hey, I'll make it quicker for you." So I think there's something to that as well. And it's basically these two opposing forces, right? Gaster trying to course correct the simulation to maintain its integrity, and the two Roaring Knights doing their best to bring on the Roaring. I think that's the main plot of Deltarune as of halfway through chapter 4. So we'll see. But my general thoughts, I think this game is amazing. I think the characters are wonderful, and it is ripe for theory crafting. Also, I love Queen so dearly. But thank you for your question, Juniper. Our next question comes from Mike, they, them. Sorry for not fully clued in. I've had an outside interest in the series since 2014. I was only wondering whether there's a mainstream understanding I've missed. The MCI kids seem to haunt like 20 different animatronics. The classics, which should mean the Wizards originally, then many seem to say they haunt the toys too, because parts were reused or something, and then also the fun times leading into the whole Molten MCI thing, which really only adds more, especially if the blob is Molten Freddy XL. Some people seem to ignore the DCI kids as possession options because we don't have info or names on them like the MCI 5. I've also heard people say the DCI kids aren't real or the same 5 kids as the MCI. I'm sure there's more ideas. Where do you stand, at least in the main 4, FNAF 1 through 5? Do the same kids just keep getting melted and thrown into new robots, or the same characters, or what? Yeah, Mike, welcome to FNAF. And I don't mean that condescendingly. Thank you for your question. That's everybody's question. That's like the main question of the series is like, where are these kids' souls going? So do not feel bad for being confused. It's confusing. That's why people make whole careers trying to figure it out, because it is genuinely very confusing, in an interesting and fun way, right? My take on it is that there's less robots than you think there are. So there's an original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 83. And the MCI happens at that restaurant where 5 kids are systematically killed and shoved into animatronic suits. And those children go on to possess those suits. For that, Freddy Fazbear's closes at some point after the MCI because of the bad press. I believe also after Charlotte is killed, but, c'est la vie. Then FNAF 2 opens. And we hear about the toy animatronics. These toys are supposed to be brand new, state-of-the-art, and they're supposed to keep everybody safe, But as the week goes on, things are going wrong. And we get this mention that the old animatronics are kept around for spare parts. That's the only mention for that, is that like originally they were going to use them and tried to retrofit them, but it didn't work out, so they just keep them around for spare parts. Which I think is the explanation for why they look so jacked up, is that like they tried to make them look cute and it did not work. But the question is like, so the Wizards, right? Those original Freddy Fazbear Pizza animatronics, those are the original 5, the ones that are possessed by the MCI kids. What about the toys? Some people say it's the DCI. Some people say they're glitching, and some people say it's the MCI. Where are we getting information for this? My take on it is the MCI kids. And the main reason for that is the DCI is the event of 5 children being killed at this new location. And the only reason this theory exists is because of Save Them, the FNAF 2 minigame where you walk through the FNAF 2 location and there are pools of blood and bodies scattered. And they're just left out and about. So the fact that it's at the FNAF 2 location and the fact that the bodies are not stuffed in suits, this really cannot be the same murder. This is a new set of murders. So that's why it's the dead child incident, because they never went missing, right? They're scattered on the floor. And we get the reason FNAF 2 is shutting down. There's the whole like, hey, there's an investigation. No one's allowed in or out. So linking that up with find them. And the newspaper clipping that this location was only open for like a few short weeks, I believe, like a month this place was open, and it already is shut down because of this. So I don't think the DCI kids are haunting the toys, because this happens on night like 6, right? There's the investigation and everything is shut down on night 6. But the toy animatronics can kill you night 1. Like, they're ready. So whatever's wrong with the toys happens before the DCI. So is it a malfunction or is it the MCI? Malfunction? Possible. I think malfunction is possible. The only point against it is that in FNAF AR, the mobile game, when they recreate Mangle, there's a specific email in there where it's like, yeah, I know there was stories about Mangle crawling on the ceiling, but there's no way we can figure out how a robot could do that. Which is kind of pointing to like, hey, Mangle's probably paranormal because it can literally crawl on the ceiling. What's that about? So if it's paranormal, it kind of falls back to the MCI. And the thinking there being, in Sister Location and later games, we learn that like Remnant can be manipulated and injected into other things, where you can melt down this possessed animatronic and inject it into a new one to move the soul over. So if the toys were being used as if the Wizards were being used as spare parts for the toys, there is a possibility that some of that remnant moved over with those spare parts, which is why the toys are also very erratic, right? The toys aren't like, not to say the FNAF 1 animatronics are controlled. We don't really ever get to see the full version of those spirits. The closest we get to is in the FNAF movie. In the FNAF movie, they're very their person. Like, they build a fort when they're not threatened. They're very the kids that they are being possessed by. But every time we see them in game, they're so scattered and animalistic. And I think this is kind of explaining why. Maybe that original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, those animatronics were similar to the movie ones. But by the time we see them in FNAF 2, their souls have been split apart and are less in control now, which is why they're so animalistic. Then FNAF 2 closes down, and FNAF 1 happens next, chronologically, as far as I'm aware. You could argue Sister Location happens in the middle. It's up to you. That's kind of just preference. By FNAF 1, it's the original animatronics, but pieces are missing, which is why they are a bit more animalistic, and it's still that MCI group. Now you may be wondering, what about the toys that have the MCI kids in them? Well, the newspaper specifically states the originals are kept in case we want to open again, but the toys are scrapped. Which, if they're just throwing them out, that means William Afton would have clear access to take them and begin melting them down for Remnant, which is where I think Sister Location comes into play. Because Sister Location has this Remnant injector, which is implying he is melting down Remnant to inject into the Fun Times. So now that half of the MCI kids is being put into the Funtime animatronics. So FNAF 1 happens, and, then we have Follow Me. I believe after FNAF 1. You can argue before or after. I believe after. Follow me. We have William Afton systematically taking apart all of the FNAF 1 animatronics at the FNAF 1 location. Or at least what the thing that looks the closest like it. And the question is, what happens to those spirits? Because those are the main bodies that the MCI spirits were possessing. There's two takes. Some people believe he took all those pieces down to the bunker night after night and melted them down for remnant. Some people believe he never made it, and those spirits just moved on. I think, the more I think about it, the more I'm of the mind that it could really go either way, because even if he doesn't bring any of the metal back to melt down, we get this sense in the books of needing to collect your parts to move on. If these souls were freed from the animatronic bodies and are now just kind of out and about doing whatever, they could theoretically go seek out their other halves, find the Fun Times, and merge with them. Which is why when we see the Fun Time animatronics, they are so, like, crazy and jittery, and, like, Funtime Foxy is literally, like, spasming at any moment. And they're so hard to control now because all this remnant is gathering in them. And once we get to the Fun Times, it's way less speculative. Like, all that was very speculative. Once we get to the Fun Times, it's way less speculative. Because if all the MCI's spirits are within the Fun Times, the plot of that game is they form into Ennard, and then we see Ennard run to the sewers. We get the conversation between Circus Baby and a group. And then in the next game, Circus Baby and the remainder of Ennard are two characters, right? Like, that's all very straightforward. And then as far as are they in the blob, I would say no, because I personally think FNAF World and Happiest Day happen in the fires of FNAF 6 and all the spirits move on. The blob is probably an agony creature, but that's a whole nother can of worms. So to answer your question, my take on it is that it is these 5 kids, but they're mostly in the original animatronics the whole time. It's pieces of them are being shed in different locations, and they have to be gathered by FNAF 6. That's my take on it. But there's a lot of takes on it. That's one opinion. Many people don't even believe that Molten MCI is correct. The idea that Molten Freddy is the MCI victims. So that's kind of the fun part about FNAF. Like I said at the beginning of this question, welcome to FNAF. There's a lot of desperate, like, different pieces of information. Nothing is really super solid and impossible to disprove, and we just get to play in this space with all this information. So I hope you have fun, and thank you for your question. I think that just about does us for today, because it's kind of getting late, and recording I'm past 45 minutes. I think the episode's going to be about 40 minutes, but again, if you have questions you want answered on the podcast, feel free to send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's in the description to copy and paste because it is a pain to type out. But until next time, as always, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.